Well, look for new higher standards for efficiency and tougher rules on greenhouse gas emissions for the nation's vehicles to boost the cost of a new car more than $1,000. EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson and Transportation Secretary LaHood announced a plan for a nearly 40% increase in fuel efficiency and the first ever nationwide limits on greenhouse gas emissions from vehicles. New vehicles made in the U.S. are to average 35.5 miles a gallon by 2016. The President back in May announced that government regulations would link economy standards, efficiency standards with emission standards. One congressional official says the plan is expected to cut greenhouse gas emissions by nearly 950 metric tons. The President also said that $1,300 in added costs would take 3 years to pay off and actually would save $2,800 in improved gas mileage over the vehicle's lifetime. Here to talk more about this announcement is Charles Territo. He's Senior Communications Director at the Alliance for Auto Manufacturers. Charles, good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
So if it's official, I guess, emissions reductions are moving to tailpipes. How is this going over among auto manufacturers and dealers? Well,
this is something we've expected. You know, back in May, we actually had an announcement with the President where we announced that we would work together towards meeting the goal.
So there were agreements made behind the scenes. This is a negotiation.
Absolutely. What this is the rulemaking. This is the roadmap that manufacturers will have to follow in order to meet these standards by 2016. And we're pleased because it gives us some certainty, it gives us some consistency, it gives us time to plan for future fuel economy increases, and that's what's most important.
Right, and what's going to be most important to some others is how much it costs them. Now I'm hearing $1,300 per car increased in cost, but $1,100 possible increase in the sticker price.
Well, you know, the cost of vehicles will vary based on the manufacturer and based on the vehicle.
They're going up, though.
So there's no question that for most vehicles there will be an increase in cost due to these regulations.
Do you see folks hanging on to their cars a bit longer, or do you see them really believing catching on to this, you know, $3,000 or something in savings over the life of the vehicle?
You know, I think some of that
I guess people buy cars when they have to.
And I think some of that will be dependent on the price of gasoline. If gasoline stays relatively low in the $2 to $3 range, then it will be very difficult for consumers to see a payback for purchasing the more fuel-efficient vehicles. But if gas prices rise, if we see $4 gasoline again, I think we can be pretty sure that consumers will look to purchase some of the more fuel-efficient, less CO2 producing vehicles out there.
Okay, so one big plus about this plan is that it makes all the requirements for all the different vehicles and all the different states uniform, right? One of the car makers' big complaints with that is the patchwork that they just couldn't meet.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, before we made this agreement with the President, with the White House, and with the administration and Congress, we were in a situation where we faced inconsistent and competing fuel economy regulations and greenhouse gas regulations at both the state and federal level. And not only did we have 13 states vying to implement their own standards, but we also had both the EPA and the Department of Transportation. This brings all of those stakeholders together and creates for the first time a national program for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and improving fuel economy from new autos.
It sounds extremely costly for the industry to try to achieve this. I mean, do you think that it can be done? Well, and with existing technology?
Well, certainly it will be a challenge with existing technology. You know, there is no one silver bullet. There's no one technology. It will take diverse fuels. It will take diverse automobile technologies. And the Department of Transportation estimates that it will cost approximately $60 billion to manufacturers over the next 6 years in order to implement these new standards. But we're very focused on meeting them. We recognize concerns about energy security and reducing emissions, and we're hopeful that new technologies will allow us to meet these standards cost effectively.
Not everyone agrees, though. We do have the chamber and some auto dealers out there vowing to fight these changes, to fight these rules in court. Do you expect that to go anywhere?
You know, we're not part of those legal challenges. I think we're committed to trying to meet the standards. Regardless of what the outcome is of those legal challenges, manufacturers are working towards bringing more fuel-efficient and less CO2 producing vehicles to the market.
How groundbreaking is yesterday's announcement? I mean, do you think we're going to look back in 10 or 20 years and say, gosh, you know, can you believe that happened? We used to actually have these kinds of vehicle standards and these kinds of emission standards back then?
You know, I think it is very groundbreaking. For the first time, it brought together not only automakers with the environmental groups and with some of the other stakeholders, but it also brought together for the first time EPA and the Department of Transportation to do a joint rulemaking. So absolutely, I think this is an historic announcement. It shows for years the industry was at odds with both the state of California and at times the federal government over how to implement standards. This program brings them all together and creates a program that we believe is achievable, and we believe that in the end consumers will benefit.
If it happens, I guess we still have this endangerment finding to get over.
that is part of it. But either way, we're going to work towards meeting higher standards.
All right, Charles Territo, Alliance for Automobile Manufacturers, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me, Susan.
We appreciate your insight.